During the early days of the Revolutionary War, the American patriots did not have a particularly well-organized army. Therefore, rowdy militiamen like Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys were necessary to achieve victory over the hated British. This short narrative tells the tale of the capture of Fort Ticonderoga in 1775, along with a classic line from Ethan Allen during the surrender. The narrative also features the brilliant military leader Benedict Arnold, who would tragically become a traitor later on in the Revolutionary War. I hope that you will enjoy this brief patriotic narrative from Washington Irving. If you're enjoying this reading from Friendly Frog Press, please make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys by Washington Irving, narrated by Paul Beauheart. Story of the capture of Fort Ticonderoga by the Robin Hood of the New Hampshire Grants. As affairs were now drawing to a crisis and war was considered inevitable, some bold spirits in Connecticut conceived a project for the outset. This was the surprisal of the old forts of Ticonderoga and Crown Point, already famous in the French War. Their situation on Lake Champlain gave them the command of the main route to Canada, so that the possession of them would be all-important in case of hostilities. They were feebly garrisoned and negligently guarded, and abundantly furnished with artillery and military stores so much needed by the Patriot army. The scheme was set on foot in the purlieus, as it were, of the provincial legislature of Connecticut, then in session. It was not openly sanctioned by the body, but secretly favored, and money lent from the treasury to those engaged in it. A committee was appointed also to accompany them to the frontier, aid them in raising troops, and exercise over them a degree of superintendence and control. 16 men were thus enlisted in Connecticut, a greater number in Massachusetts, but the greatest accession of force was from what was called the New Hampshire Grants. This was a region having the Connecticut River on one side and Lake Champlain and the Hudson River on the other, being in fact the country forming the present state of Vermont. It had long been a disputed territory claimed by New York and New Hampshire. George II had decided in favor of New York, but the governor of New Hampshire had made grants of between 1 and 200 townships in it, whence it had acquired the name of the New Hampshire Grants. The settlers on those grants resisted the attempts of New York to eject them and formed themselves into an association called the Green Mountain Boys. Resolute, strong-handed fellows they were, with Ethan Allen at their head, a native of Connecticut, but brought up among the Green Mountains. He and his lieutenants, Seth Warner and Remember Baker, were outlawed by the legislature of New York, and rewards offered for their apprehension. They and their associates armed themselves, set New York at defiance, and swore they would be the death of anyone who should attempt their arrest. Thus Ethan Allen was becoming a kind of Robin Hood among the mountains when the present crisis changed the relative position of things as if by magic. Boundary feuds were forgotten amid the great questions of colonial rights. Ethan Allen at once stepped forward, a patriot, and volunteered with his Green Mountain Boys to serve in the popular cause. He was well fitted for the enterprise in question by his experience as a frontier champion, his robustness of mind and body, and his fearless spirit. He had a kind of rough eloquence, also, that was very effective with his followers. His style, says one who knew him personally, was a singular compound of local barbarisms, scriptural phrases, and oriental wildness, and though unclassic and sometimes ungrammatical, was highly animated and forcible. Washington, in one of his letters, says there was an original something in him which commanded admiration. Thus reinforced, the party, now 270 strong, pushed forward to Castleton, a place within a few miles of the head of Lake Champlain. Here a council of war was held on the 2nd of May. Ethan Allen was placed at the head of the expedition, with James Easton and Seth Warner as second and third in command. Detachments were sent off to Skanesboro, now Whitehall, and another place on the lake, with orders to seize all the boats they could find and bring them to Shoreham, opposite Ticonderoga, whither Allen prepared to proceed with the main body. At this juncture, other adventurous spirit arrived at Castleton. That was Benedict Arnold, since so sadly renowned. He too had conceived the project of surprising Ticonderoga and Crown Point, or perhaps had caught the idea from its first agitators in Connecticut, in the militia of which province he held a captain's commission. He had proposed the scheme to the Massachusetts Committee of Safety. It had met their approbation. They had given him a colonel's commission, authorized him to raise a force in western Massachusetts not exceeding 400 men, and furnished him with money and means. Arnold had enlisted but a few officers and men when he heard of the expedition from Connecticut being on the march. He instantly hurried on with one intended to overtake it, leaving his few recruits to follow as best they could. In this way he reached Castleton just after the council of war. Producing the colonel's commission received from the Massachusetts Committee of Safety, he now aspired to the supreme command. His claims were disregarded by the Green Mountain Boys. They would follow no leader but Ethan Allen. As they formed the majority of the party, Arnold was fain to acquiesce and serve as a volunteer with the rank, but not the command, of colonel. The party arrived at Shoreham, opposite Ticonderoga, on the night of the 9th of May. The detachment sent in quest of boats had failed to arrive. There were a few boats at hand with which the transportation was commenced. It was slow work. The night wore away. Day was about to break, and but 83 men with Allen and Arnold had crossed. Should they wait for the residue? Day would dawn, the garrison awake, and their enterprise might fail. Allen drew up his men, addressed them in his own emphatic style, and announced his intention to make a dash at the fort without waiting for more force. "It is a desperate attempt," said he, "and I ask no man to go against his will. I will take the lead and be the first to advance. You that are willing to follow, poise your firelocks." Not a firelock, but was poised. They mounted the hill briskly, but in silence, guided by a boy from the neighborhood. The day dawned as Allen arrived at a sally port. A sentry pulled trigger on him, but his piece misfired. He retreated through a covered way. Allen and his men followed. Another sentry thrust at Easton with his bayonet, but was struck down by Allen and begged for quarter. It was granted on condition of his leading the way instantly to the quarters of the commandant, Captain de la Place, who was yet in bed. Being arrived there, Allen thundered at the door and demanded a surrender of the fort. By this time his followers had formed into two lines on the parade ground and given 3 hearty cheers. The commandant appeared at his door half-dressed, the frightened face of his pretty wife peering over his shoulder. He gazed at Allen in bewildered astonishment. "By whose authority do you act?" exclaimed he. "In the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress," replied Allen, with a flourish of his sword, in an oath which we do not care to subjoin. There was no disputing the point. The garrison, like the commander, had been startled from sleep and made prisoners as they rushed forth in their confusion. A surrender accordingly took place. End of story. If you enjoyed this reading, please make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and check out friendlyfrogpress.com, where you can see where our collection of ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks are available. Friendly Frog Press, where the classics come alive. This is Paul Beauheart, signing off.